Hello, Scott. Thank you. Get my notes here. All right. Well, how is everyone enjoying UCEA 17? Yes. Yes. All right. Very good. Thank you again to the Convention Planning Committee who assisted me. We have Erin Anderson, Miriam Izani, and then Cristobal Rodriguez. So thank you. All right. So we're here now for our second general session. We have a great speaker coming up for you, our Mitstifer lecture. And so before we do that and get an introduction to the Mitstifer lecture and its history, I'm going to introduce Ed Fuller to you. Ed Fuller is an associate professor in the Department of Education Policy Studies in the College of Ed at Penn State University. His research interests include, obviously, educator quality, mobility, and turnover, and he currently serves as the Associate Director for Policy. So when we consider Ed and the work that he brings to UCA, he always keeps us at the forefront of what's happening with policy and how UCA can help to carve our way and a niche. So to tell you more about the Mitstifer lecture, Ed Fuller.
Thank you, Mariella. Good evening. So I'm here to introduce the Mitstifer lecture. This lecture has been sponsored by the Penn State College of Education and the Department of Education Policy Studies for over 2 decades now. The Mitstifer lecture honors Dr. Robert Mitstifer, a Pennsylvania administrator of an intermediate unit and a graduate of Penn State University. The lecture is funded through the generosity of his wife, Dr. Dorothy Mitstifer, also a Penn State graduate. And it is my honor and privilege on behalf of Penn State College of Education and the Department of Education Policy Studies to continue this support. So I am going to now introduce Dr. Scott McLeod, who will then introduce our speaker. Thank you very much.
Oh, dearest UCA friends, good evening. Welcome to the Mile High City. Hope you're having fun. It's wonderful to have all of you here tonight. I hope you're having yet another fantastic UCEA conference full of learning and dialoguing and sharing and supporting. Some of you may know I have one of the world's most popular education blogs. It's been one of the most wonderful things that I've ever done professionally. I started way back in 2006, which makes me a blogging grandfather when you measure it in internet years. What many of you may not know is that our keynote speaker, Will Richardson, actually started blogging with his students in New Jersey 5 years before that. That very early foray back in 2001, so Will, I don't know if that makes you like great-great-grandpa or forefather or whatever. That early foray into student voice and transformational learning really launched Will into a lifelong investigation regarding what does powerful student learning look like, and what are the educational structures necessary that enable it to occur. I've known Will for a really long time. I'm incredibly delighted he's here tonight to speak with us, but I gotta tell you, he pushes my thinking on a regular basis. Will asks me questions that I don't know how to answer. I don't know how to answer them as a P-12 educator, or as a faculty member, or as a policy advocate, or as a parent. But the questions that he asks me are important ones. And he asks me to lean into that challenge rather than quickly dismissing them or retreating. So I'm guessing that Will's going to do the same tonight. He's going to ask us some difficult questions, and I'm going to ask you to lean into that challenge. We talk a lot about instructional leadership here at UCEA. As Will asks us to reconsider some basic premises about learning, I encourage you to think about what those mean for teaching and for schooling, and for the work that we do in our preparation programs and with our leadership partners in the field. We also talk a lot about social justice here at UCEA. It's a very deeply held value, and we wrestle those challenges with all of the energy and hope and determination that they demand of us. And as Will speaks to us tonight, I'm going to encourage you to think about his words within the context of what they mean for our most marginalized students and their families and communities. in an educational reform space that's currently dominated by accountability mandates and standardized tests of low-level learning and punitive policymaking, how do we truly prepare all of our students to be successful in a rapidly changing, hyper-connected global innovation society, rather than continuing to exacerbate existing inequities? I hope that you enjoy Will's presentation this evening, and I really hope that you'll continue the conversation with us throughout the conference, including our official debriefing session tomorrow at 12:20. Thanks so much for being here. I'm absolutely delighted to hand over the stage to Will Richardson. Let's give him a very warm UCA welcome.
Thank you, Scott. Appreciate it. Thanks a lot. Good evening, everyone. That's the first time I've ever been called a grandfather in an introduction, so I really appreciate that, Scott. It's great to be here. Let me go up and throw this full screen. Do I need to? Or we got it? Let me see. We got it. It's great to be here tonight. Really appreciate the invite. And as Scott said, we've been friends and known each other online and in various online spaces and also face-to-face spaces for quite a while. And it's always good to catch up with him. We took a stroll down. It's like springtime in Denver today, so we took a stroll down the main street, and we were just talking, and we were asking each other a lot of these questions that he talked about. And I really want to continue that inquiry, because I think this is a moment for all of us in education that we need to be asking a lot of really heady questions, some of them that make us really uncomfortable, and as Scott said, many of which don't have clear answers. But they are important for us now to start to grapple with, because I think that our kids deserve that, and I think that if we don't do that, we run some risks in terms of kind of moving forward and trying to figure out what our value is in a world that's much, much different from what it used to be. So just really fast, if you want these slides, I'm going to go through lots of a pretty big deck pretty quickly. But if you want them, you can just send me an email, more@willrichardson. Doesn't sign you up for anything, but I'll send you the slide deck. I'll also give you a whole bunch of other resources that you can continue reading, so you can push your thinking a little bit more if you like, and I'll invite you to do that anytime. So I looked, Scott mentioned the breakout tomorrow. That is kind of the follow-up to this session, and as I was reading it, I was looking at some of the words that were being used there, and apparently my job here tonight is to get your head to whirl, it's to get you to struggle, but it's also to get you somewhat excited about the ideas. So when I was thinking about that, put a little pressure on me, and every time I start to feel pressure, I like to go back to my childhood days. So I want to start here, actually, with the question, anyone know who that is? Who? Ernie Banks. It is Ernie Banks. Yes, it is. And me, by the way. That's me. This was the last haircut I ever had. My mom basically was standing at the doorway as I was running out. I think she had a pair of scissors, and I just kind of ran by, and she just kind of cut it on an angle. Ernie Banks was my hero when I was growing up. I'm a lifelong Cubs fan, and up until a couple weeks ago, we were the world champions, but hopefully we'll do that again soon. But when I think about my childhood and I think about learning, this is what I think about. And I don't just think about, the person, I think about the baseball card. Because I spent a lot of time learning math on the back of a baseball card. In fact, most of the math that still sticks with me, I learned on the back of a baseball card. I was huge into statistics and percentages and trying to kind of go forward and try to estimate how many home runs or how many RBIs or whatever else. I remember actually living in Chicago where they had a contest in 1969. For those of you who are Cubs fans, you know that 69 was the darkest year in our history. That was the Black Cat year where we were winning by 9 games at the beginning of September. A black cat ran in front of the dugout. We lost by 9 games to the Mets by the end of September. But they had this big contest, try to predict the exact moment when the Cubs would clinch the pennant, right? And I sent in all these entries but it was math. It was just math. And I felt like that was the one time in my life when math was enjoyable to me, when it was something that I really just kind of was engaged in. And the reason that I bring that up is because I own 2 kids, and if any of you are parents, you probably are reflecting on their learning as they go to school. And for both of my kids, they don't really engage in math the same way in terms of what's happening in school versus what's happening in their real lives. So my daughter, Tess, is 20, and I'm just gonna let you know she's okay. She didn't go to college, but she's okay. She's on her 3rd gap year now, and some people are asking me, so when does it stop being a gap year? When does it start being just a gap life? She really doesn't know what she wants to do, and that's cool. We told her, you know, if you want to save us 45 grand a year to figure it out, please go ahead and do that, and we'd be happy to support you in terms of thinking about other things. But, and my son Tucker is 18. I'm going to talk about Tuck a little bit because I think it's interesting. There's some interesting parallels, but I just want you to understand how much of my lens for this conversation is from my parenting lens, and how much their experiences as learners have really changed the way I think about education, the way I think about schools, the way I think about a lot of things. And obviously, if you're parents, you know what I'm talking about in terms of just change in general. So Tucker graduated from high school in June, and you know, with both my kids, but especially with Tuck, he never cracked a book, I'll just tell you. I hardly ever remember him opening up a book, unless it was like at 11:10 and he had something that he had to hand in online at midnight. Or he just was, you know, whatever. And he got a 3.5 or 3.6, I don't know what he got. He did really well, but he just was not engaged in an academic sense in school. It was not something that he enjoyed. It was not something that he saw a lot of value in. He didn't find a lot of relevance in it. And where he did find a lot of relevance, though, in learning was actually outside of school. Most of the learning that was profound, that has been profound in his life, he has done outside of school, without question. In fact, I think it's arguable that he learned very much at all in school. And I'll let that hang there for a second, because that's a pretty big statement to make. But I'm not sure he learned very much in school, to be honest with you, in classrooms, in terms of the content, the curriculum, whatever else. I'll show you where his classroom was. This is where he learned. He loves basketball, and he is really good at basketball. And he is constantly engaged in learning more about basketball. He's learned so much, actually, that on Tuesday, he signed his national letter of intent to play at Colgate. And that is a big deal. It's not just a big deal from a financial standpoint, but it's a really big deal because of just how hard that is. To get a D1 basketball scholarship is an amazing accomplishment. And he got none of that from me. His mother was a high school All-American basketball player. And, you know, so it wasn't any genetics, but he just has a drive and he just wants to learn more. And the thing is, you know, the difference, I talk about this a lot because his mom was a really good basketball player, but she didn't have this. She didn't have almost 500,000 dribbling videos on YouTube. And she didn't have all the resources that are available to Tucker to watch people, to engage with people, to interact with people around the thing that he wants to learn about more than anything else. And she didn't have the opportunity, I'm not going to show you this video because he'd kill me, but she didn't have the opportunity to even create videos and post them to YouTube and get millions or hundreds of viewers, right? And, you know, about 150 of those are ours, right? Our family and whatever else. But we, you know, when he was this age, we kept going, oh, look, 6 more views. He was like, really? And he made like, you know, 3, 4 of these. But I mean, think about it. He's not just learning, he's teaching. He's like an 11-year-old kid who's teaching people in the world about the things that he cares about the things that he loves to do. That's pretty amazing. And I think it's just fascinating to be a parent at this moment. You know, these my kids were born in 97 and 99. Right at the beginning of all this stuff. And that trip that we've been on together, kind of just figuring out as we go, with the technologies that have come, you know, the internet, the cell phones, all that kind of stuff, there is no manual. I mean, there's never been a parenting manual, I get it, right? But this has been really, really interesting. But again, I want to emphasize, I'm talking about it more in a learning context than anything else. So I want to talk about change. I want to talk about what the challenges and opportunities are for schools right now. And if you're the ones who are educating the leaders that my kids are going to be engaged with in their schools, I want to talk about change at that level. What needs to change in the way that we prepare people to deal with the world as it is, rather than the world that school has been for a long, long time? So I noticed this in your program, and I picked it out because it says, change agents needed. And I think that's a great sentiment. But my question is, well, what do you mean when you say change? Do you mean change as in getting better at something? And I mean this with no disrespect, because I see these things, advertisements or articles or whatever else. But when I look at this, school effectiveness to the next level, my sense of it is that change is about being better at what we currently do. There's nothing wrong with that. But I want to try to suggest that we need to talk about change as in being different, not just better. And that different is challenging, and that if you're not feeling challenged, you're not really doing different, if that makes sense. I mean, I like to say to people, if you're not feeling a little uncomfortable right now being in education, with all due respect, you're not paying attention. Because things are changing, and I'm not just talking about technology, even though technology is the undercurrent for it, but things are just changing in ways that I think we in education, and especially we as educational leaders, need to really understand now. And they are not comfortable at all, because they challenge our very value in a lot of different ways. So here are the two questions that drive my work. Number one, are we doing the best that we can for every single child in the world in which, in our schools, given the world in which they live now? Are we doing the very best we can? And my answer, by and large, is we're not. We're not. We are, in many ways, stuck in a paradigm of thinking around education that has been around for a long, long time, but that is just kind of breaking right now, and that we need to rethink our practice in some fundamental ways if we're really going to do the best we can for kids as they live now. The other question that I'm really interested in is, what's our value now? In a world where teachers are everywhere, where content is everywhere, where knowledge is everywhere, where technologies are everywhere, do we still have the same value today as we did 50 years ago, 20 years ago? I think that's a legitimate question. I think the answer is our value is changing now. I'm not here to tell you that I want schools to go away. Not at all. That's not what I'm saying. I think schools have a huge, huge, huge value in kids' lives. But that value is changing now. There's no question. It has to change now because of the ways that technologies and because of the ways that access have kind of shifted the relationship. So what I want to do tonight is just kind of run through 8 realities that I think modern educational leaders have to change. I'm going to talk about things that I think we need to do differently, not just better. I'm going to talk about hopefully a construct that'll make you think about your work in terms of how you lead the leaders that are going into the schools that our kids are in. And I do think that these are, by and large, somewhat old and new. I don't think all of these are necessarily brought on because all of a sudden we have all this stuff happening. I think some of this is just old and goes back to some of our eternal beliefs around what schools and learning are. But I think it's an interesting mix. And my influences are both old and new as well. So I wonder how many of you know all 6 of these people. Just raise your hand if you know who all 6 of these people are. Okay, so these are people, I know you know some of them. Upper right is Loris Malaguzzi, who was the founder of Reggio Emilia, the Reggio Emilia schools in Italy. Who, if you haven't read Malaguzzi, if you're in education, I think you need to read Malaguzzi. I think you need to understand the way that he thinks about children and learning. John Dewey in the middle, Maria Montessori in the top right, Deborah Meyer, who is the only one of these 6 who has a blog, by the way, and whose words you can read today. Piaget, bottom right. And the one in the bottom middle is probably the one of the most profound influences on my life. How many of you know Seymour Papert? A couple of you do. And Papert is especially relevant today because he is one of the most brilliant thinkers at the intersection of learning, kids, technologies, and schooling and education. He wrote a book called Mindstorms about 30 years ago. It is still absolutely relevant today. And if you're in education, respectfully, you got to read Mindstorms. If you want to understand technology and its impact on learning, you have to read Mindstorms. It's not a question. So those are my old influences. But I have some new influence. Whoa! Jeepers. I don't know what that happened. Don't look. Close your eyes. I don't know what happened there. That was pretty interesting. Well, there's Ernie. Let's see where I am here. Okay, here we go. I have some new influences too. And so I am not a research educator. I don't do formal research, but I do a lot of anecdotal research. And two of the places that I'm doing that now are in two places that we created in the last year. One is called Change School, where we've had 180 leaders from around the world, leaders in positions right now from schools around the world, who for over 150 total hours, we have just been talking to them about their practice and trying to understand the realities that they're experiencing right now. The other is a Change Leaders community, which we just started, which has over 300 people in it right now. So we are doing action research, basically talking to people on the ground on a regular basis, questioning them, prodding them, hopefully trying to help them reframe and recontextualize their work. But I have had, over the last year, this huge, huge learning opportunity, especially in the leadership space, and it's been powerful for me. It's been some of the best learning I've ever done, and hopefully it's been a lot of great learning for them as well. We get together with these folks on Zoom. I don't know if you're familiar with Zoom. Zoom, you can have up to 1,000 people on Zoom. We haven't had that many. That would be somewhat chaotic, but we break them out into small breakout rooms. We do all sorts of stuff with them, but we have, like, in each of our cohorts, we have over 50 hours of coaching where we just get into rooms like this and we talk about stuff. And actually, if you really want to know, it's therapy. It's more therapy than anything else. These are people who are trying to do high bar change in their schools, and they're struggling with a whole bunch of stuff, but they're coming together in communities like this, and it really is therapy. Yet, it's really, really interesting work. So from that, I've kind of pulled out these 8 realities that I think are kind of interesting and hopefully will challenge you. Here's number 1. Educational leaders don't have a consistent, coherent definition of learning. If I went to 20 people in this room right now and I asked you to write down your definition of learning, I almost guarantee you I'd get 20 different answers. Almost guaranteed. I've asked that question, I've been asking this learning question now for 3-4 years. I go into schools. That's one of the first things I do when I work with schools. I go in, how do you define this? How do you define it? How do you define it? Different answers all the time. Rarely do I go into a school where they've even had a conversation around what they collectively believe learning is. It's not coherent. It's kind of all over the place. So I think really that's a third question that drives me that should be the question for all of our work, and that is, what do you mean when you say learning? What do you mean by that word? How do you define it? How do you articulate it? How do you share that definition? Not just in your schools, but in your departments, in your universities. Have you guys talked about, rhetorically, have you guys talked about what this word means in your work? Do you have common language around that word? Now, I think that there are lots of reasons why you need this. I won't read this whole thing, but Seymour Saracen, who's another one of my favorite Seymours, Saracen actually has had a bigger influence on me than even Papert in terms of school reform and school change, but he says we're never, ever going to change schools if we don't have common language around what learning is. It's just not going to happen. If we're going in 20 different directions, nothing's going to shift. And we struggle with this, and I can prove it. You ready? Here it is. We have this fetish for adding an adjective in front of the noun. And I can add to this list a new term just about every single day. I see something else. And it's personalized, it's flipped, it's blended, it's this, it's authentic. Like what is inauthentic learning? I'd love to know what that is, right? But you know what? Here's the interesting thing about this. When we say flipped learning and blended learning and personalized learning and most of these other things, we're not really talking about learning, are we? We're talking about teaching. We're talking about teaching. We're really talking about blended teaching and personalized teaching and flipped teaching. It's not really about learning, but we call it learning. We call it learning. And I wonder why we do this. Because if we really had this word down, we wouldn't need them. It's just learning. You either learn something or you don't. It doesn't matter if it's blended, flipped, personalized, authentic, inauthentic, whatever. It's just learning. So there are consequences. There are consequences for not having a consistent, coherent definition of learning. Think about, I'll tell you one consequence for my kids. They went to Block A and Block 1 and had to figure out what learning meant for that teacher. Then they went to Block 2 and they had to figure it out all over again. Then they went to Block 3 and it was a whole different definition. Then they went to Block... You know what I'm saying, right? And most kids find inconsistency in their experience in schools. Ask a kid, how consistent is what you do from classroom to classroom to classroom? What are the foundations of the work from the... Hardly ever they are. So there are consequences for kids. There are consequences for teachers. There are consequences for teachers if you teach in a district or a school where there is no coherence around that word. There are consequences for the way that you think about assessment, for the way that you think about this term education. I mean, how can you define education if you haven't defined learning? I think it's almost impossible to do that. So I love this question. And if we have more time, we talk about it. I urge you, when you head to the bar or wherever you're going after this talk about this question. What do you mean? You may need a few glasses before you get to the definition, because it's not that easy. But here's Saracen's definition. I love it. And this is one of those moments. I was reading this book, and when I read this sentence, I literally had that kind of moment where I just set the book down and I went, okay, I really got to think about what I just read. Productive learning, he says, is where the process engenders and reinforces wanting to learn more. Absent wanting to learn more, the process is unproductive. If you don't want to learn more about something, you're probably not learning whatever it is that you're talking about or thinking about. And I want you to do a gut check right now. The things that you guys have learned most powerfully and deeply in your lives, are they not things that you have wanted to learn more about? Is there anyone in this room who's an expert at something they find boring as all get out? Well, Scott's up here going, but you know what I'm saying, right? So I think this is a great definition that resonates with me, that resonates with my kids, that resonates with almost everyone that I talk to. It is about, what do you want to learn more about? My friend Roger Shank says, there's really only two things we should be teaching in high school anyway, dating and driving, because those are the only two things that kids really want to learn more about. So, my kid would kill me if he knew I was showing his report card here, but is there productive learning happening here? What do you think? Not so much. I can tell you the one thing that Tucker learned about calc is that he hated calc. I have no idea. And I asked my kids, not blatantly, I didn't go, so what do you want to learn more about? I was just trying to tease out, what are you doing in school that you're interested in? What are you doing in schools that... Not that much. They came home and learned, but it was on their terms, their stuff. Not so much what they were supposed to learn in school. They did school, and they did school pretty well, and they learned the stuff that they were supposed to learn, but I'll tell you a story about learning here in a second. So the question then becomes, so what are the conditions for people to learn productively? What are the conditions that need to be in place for people to want to learn more? And again, if we had time, I'd ask you to have this conversation, think about this. But if you just have one thing in your head right now, if you're kind of running through it, I would almost guarantee that whatever you're thinking about right now is somewhere on this list. It requires passion. It requires an authentic purpose. It requires a real audience. It's not constrained by time. It's not constrained by age. If I said to you, hey, all the 35-year-olds, please get up, go back in that corner. Scott told me you can only spend time with each other the rest of this conference. You'd be like, what are you talking about? These conditions are not rocket science. I don't think there's anything up on this slide that anyone's going to argue with me about in terms of things that are required or things that are good to have if you want to learn powerfully and deeply about something. And I know that because I've asked this question, I'm not kidding, to over 100,000 people over the last 3 years in like 17 different countries. The answers never deviate from this list. They never deviate from this list. It's amazing. It's not rocket science. We all know it. This is not hard. That's not a hard question. I am going to show you what people never say when I ask them, what are the conditions for deep and powerful learning to happen in kids' lives? I've never once had anybody say any of this. Ever. Yet, when I go to schools, and I walk into classrooms, and I talk to kids, and I talk to teachers, and I talk to leaders, this is what school looks like. So, this is kind of interesting. Because we believe the stuff on the left. No one argues about it. But we do the stuff on the right, by and large. It's starting to change a little bit, but not at scale. And it is the difference between being efficient and being effective. And I get we need to have some efficiencies built into the system, but I think we need to own the fact that they're not always the right thing to do. And this is Russell Acuff, who's one of my favorite authors, if you want to read a great book, Turning Learning Right Side Up. And in there he says, basically, you can do the right thing or you can try to do the wrong thing right. And by and large, schools and other institutions are trying to do the wrong thing right. But he says at the end of that, just don't forget, the righter you are at doing the wrong thing, the wronger you get. So the better you are at the wrong thing, the wronger you keep getting. I think that's a challenge. And by the way, it's not just the kids. This is Saracen again, and I know this is a long quote. Remember, more at willrichardson.com if you want to read all these things. But he basically says, look, here's the deal, and this is really important, and this is specifically for educational leaders, that the conditions that you create for kids must also be present for teachers. Teachers must be learners in those contexts as well, or why bother? And I will tell you, I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, but I will tell you, most places that I go, most schools that I walk into, within 5 minutes I can tell you whether or not they're teaching cultures or learning cultures, and by and large, almost all of them are teaching cultures. Just let me look at the professional development list, and I can tell you what the emphasis is. So that's number one. Number two, we're really not assessing learning anyway. And I'll tell you a story to kind of sums that up. So this is Lawrenceville Prep, which is about 20 minutes from my house in New Jersey. It's 4 miles down 206 from Princeton. It's one of the most prestigious prep schools in the country, $60,000 a year to send your kids here. And the reason that they send their kids there is to go to Princeton, basically. So they were really brave, and a few years ago, they decided to do a little bit of an experiment. They said, let's take this class of junior science kids, and when they come back, this particular classroom, when they come back in September, let's give them the same final exam in science that they took in June. Let's give it to them again in September cold. We're not going to tell them. We're just going to bring them in and have them do the test. So in June, when they took the test, they did pretty well, 87. Anyone want to guess what they got in September? 60. Woo, 58. 58. And anyone want to guess what they got the following June if they'd taken that test a year later? Probably much, much worse. And I wonder how many of us would be brave enough to do this experiment ourselves, to give the test, and then 3 months later come back and give it again without telling them. Now, is that learning? Which of those numbers better represents what they learned? Probably the 58. Or less. And again, this is not rocket science. We all know this. I don't know about you guys, but I'm pretty sure most of you probably forgot most of what you learned in high school. A lot of it just as soon as the test was over. And it's the same thing for my kids. There were a lot of things I learned in high school. Most of those things weren't on the test. The stuff that was on the test, yeah. And so, kids know this too, right? So we have kids writing essays in Medium, why school sucks. It's not because it's boring, it's because, guess what? It's not about learning, it's about grades. It's about getting a score. It's about getting a GPA. This girl in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, she writes, my generation has developed an unhealthy obsession over grades instead of learning. And I can tell you I'm looking at a lot of people in the audience going, yeah, that's absolutely right. It's absolutely true. And we know it. We're not kidding ourselves about it. So, yeah, I don't know what he learned, to be honest with you. I have no idea. You know, and for most parents, this is the communication of learning that comes home, or the parent portal. This is where we go to see what our kids are learning. I have no idea. I can't tell you what this means. And the other piece of it is now, the assessments that we're giving are not really healthy for kids. I mean, you've heard this, you've read this. There's a new book out called Kids These Days. If you really want to get a sense of what's happening with adolescents and millennials these days, basically, this was an article in the Times earlier this year about a Massachusetts school where they're painting rocks to one another that say things, "You are not your GPA." Because I had superintendents, plural, in change school on many occasions say, "I have kids just crying in my hallway right now because they can't get into the AP class that they need to get into in order to become the valedictorian or whatever reason. Or they didn't get the grade that they wanted." Well, I don't know why that keeps doing that. Sorry. So there's no question that we've set up this kind of pressure on kids to define themselves by the ways that we score them and by the assessments that we give them. This is Naperville, a school outside of Chicago, where a girl went to change.org and basically started a petition that said, "You guys, stop it. School leaders, stop it. Because you're creating a path that is so narrow that very, very few of us can stay on it. And it's not healthy." By the way, I don't know if you've heard, but 150 and growing of the most elite private schools in the country have gotten together and created a site called Masteryorg. How many of you have heard of Masteryorg? Any of you? A couple people. So Masteryorg, basically they're saying to colleges in 5 years, we will not be sending you numbered transcripts anymore. We're done. We're done. And what they're going to do is, over the next 5 years, open this up to public schools as well. And they are going to get 500, 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 schools to jump on this because kids are hurting. And their quote is, "The high school transcript aims to assess student progress and performance, but it is a broken instrument that no longer serves students, teachers, or the world outside our school walls." And we are done. And these are some of the most prestigious schools in the country. We're done. And this is going to change things. More and more you are seeing now people standing up and going, "This is not good for kids. It doesn't give us the information that we really need, and it doesn't really speak to what kids are learning." Reality number 3, schools look less and less like the real world in a learning context. So, I mean, I think you guys understand this too, that, we created schools for a time that has dramatically shifted. Basically, schools were built in a world that was built on scarcity. And in a world of scarcity, if I can get this thing to work, there we go. In a world of scarcity, it said, if you want to learn algebra, you have to come here on this particular day, at this particular time, in this particular classroom, with this particular teacher, and these particular kids who are your particular age, from your particular neighborhood, to go through this particular curriculum at this particular pace and be assessed in this particular way. Because if you don't do that, you may not learn algebra. This is where the algebra is. You have to come get it. And the teacher is there, and the technologies are there, and everything else. Well, that's just not true anymore. Algebra is everywhere. Everything in the curriculum is now everywhere. And it's not just the stuff, it's not just the information. And by the way, there's a lot of crap represented in this picture. And if you don't have a good crap detector right now, good luck. But it's not just the information, and it's the teachers too. And this is kind of my representation of my Twitter universe, but I'll tell you, and Scott can attest to this too, some of the best teachers that we've met in our lives have been people who we met in our online spaces, outside of our physical spaces, about the things that we wanted to learn more about. That's a huge affordance. This bothers people though, so just to see if you're still awake, and just to play along, can I get you all to raise your right hand right now, please? Everybody raise your right hand, and just repeat after me. I want to be found by strangers on the internet. A couple people over there nodding off, but you do. You do. If you're telling me that I can only learn with people in my face-to-face world, you're eliminating the vast majority of my opportunities to learn right now. And yet, every day when my kids go to school, that's exactly what they're being told. You can't learn with anybody outside of your physical space. It's not only narrowing in terms of their abilities to learn, it's not realistic any longer. By the way, there's not a person in this room that hasn't gone to YouTube and put in a search that starts with, how do I change a muffler, cook pasta, file for divorce, whatever it is that you're trying to figure out. That's my other laugh line, just to see if people are awake. No, but you know what I'm saying, right? We all do this. And the other piece of it is the technologies. The technologies are 2 million apps in the App Store right now, and it's kind of crazy. You can't even there's no way to figure it out. If you don't have a good network right now, good luck when it comes to that stuff. But the bottom line is, welcome to the new world. This is it. This is what the world looks like right now. You may not like it. You may feel uncomfortable about it. You may not want to go there. If you're in education, with all due respect, you got to go there now. You have to understand this now. I would say it borders on malpractice if you don't. Because there is a huge amount of powerful learning that is happening in these spaces that is in no way contextualized for the kids we serve in our schools. And by and large, that is because we're not there. We don't understand it, and it's not on the test. So the reality of it is basically that we can learn almost anything we want, anytime we want, anywhere we are, with whomever we can find. Not everything. I don't want my brain surgeon trained on YouTube. I get it. There are always going to be professions and need for traditional learning, but more and more now, this is an opportunity that people are taking advantage of, and it's not happening in school, and that has consequences. I don't know if you've heard the Gallup report, 3rd year in a row. 750,000 kids, 32% of juniors say they're engaged in school. That's it, 32%. And they call this the school cliff at Gallup. Kids come to us when they're in kindergarten, they're wagging their tails. They want to learn everything, right? They're just wagging their tails. Butterflies and sewer covers and whatever. Oh, what's that, right? 4th grade, they're still, wagging. But then it gets narrower and narrower and narrower, and we take away more and more and more choice, more and more agency, and kids become disengaged. These are not conditions for deep and powerful learning to happen. Reality number 4, curriculum is now discovered, not delivered. It's not something that comes in lockstep any longer, A, because curriculum changes so quickly, and B, because it's now not about being learned as much as it is about being a learner. That's the shift that we have to really understand. So, I love this quote, if I can get this thing to go. Okay, I'm just going to stand up here, because I can't do that much more. All right. So I love this quote from Stephen Downes, who says, we need to move beyond the idea that an education is something that's provided for us and toward the idea that an education is something we create for ourselves, because we can. We can create our own education in a lot of ways right now. If we have the opportunity and we have the literacies to do that, the dispositions to do that, it becomes something that is easier and easier to do. And this is the shift that's really hard for us, because now everything is in perpetual beta in education. Nothing, but the people we work with in Change School, one of the first things we tell them is, if you embark on a change process to really get different in your schools, just understand this, you will never be done. You will never wake up one morning and check the box and say, we're finished. Basically, it is in perpetual beta, and things are changing in terms of how you define educated, literate, skilled, all that stuff. Okay, so now I'm going to do it this way. And by the way, as Papert says, I think really brilliantly, curriculum is just a guess. Now that we have access to all of it, what 1/10000000th of 1% are we going to teach in school? And how do we know we got the right 1/10000000th of 1%? And what are the consequences of trying to guess exactly what it is that every kid needs to know when they need to know it, and all that type of stuff? Number 5, student outcomes are changing. So the whole idea of college and career is now becoming interesting. Basically, there are a lot of kids now who are going to schools, paying a lot of money, coming out with debt, and basically not being able to find jobs in their chosen career space. Now look, I'm not suggesting that if you have the option to do so, that you shouldn't go to college. The equation, the calculus right now is, if you can afford college, go to college. But if you can't afford college, then you need to think really long and hard before you put yourself into tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. There are people in this room right now that are paying off student loans, there's no doubt, and will be paying off student loans for a long time. And that has had huge consequences for those kids, for those people, for the economy, whatever else. So there is no guarantee. You know, I used to tell a story, I have a picture somewhere of my mom on my graduation day from Ohio University. And she was a Swedish immigrant right off the boat after World War II. And my mom and dad were divorced when I was like 8 years old. And so I was the first Richardson to go to college when I was growing up. She used to say, "Will, you're going to college, you're going to college." And she was like the manager of a Holiday Inn, and I kept going, you know, there's no way I'm going to college, we just can't afford it. But my dad somehow pitched in, and I delivered like 8 million Domino's pizzas when I was at college. And there's pictures, she's looking at me, and there's two things that she's feeling in that picture. Number one, she's feeling pride. I mean, you can just see it oozing from her. She's so proud of me that I was able to get the degree. But the other thing she's feeling is relief, because I was going to be okay. I had the degree, and that was a ticket. It was almost a guarantee that I was going to be okay. It's not a ticket any longer. There's no guarantee any longer. It's a much different kind of environment, learning environment, than it used to be. So, and I know this is a push, but you know, a lot of people now are just kind of looking at it and going, well, what is the college degree in a world where more and more people are going, well, prove it. Okay, you've got the degree, but now prove it. Prove that you can actually do something with the degree. Prove that you've got the portfolio, the skills, the competencies, resume-worthy credentials, shorter non-degree programs, all that type of stuff. Work is changing, there's no question. And by the way, you know, professional development, I think, is moving away from being the responsibility of the institution to the responsibility of the person. I mean, I say this all the time to teacher groups. There are a lot of people who use Twitter. Any of you have a Twitter account that you use on a regular basis, by the way? Oh, cool. All right. Anybody tweeting this right now? Oh, crap. Probably one long Z right across. But I say to people, if you think Twitter is interesting, because most people in my network will tell you that Twitter is probably their #1 professional development tool. If they're curated correctly, if you follow really good people, that's the key to Twitter, by the way, just follow really good people. But I say to people, look, if you're interested in learning Twitter, go learn Twitter. If you're waiting for the workshop, you're missing the point. If you're still waiting for the Twitter workshop or the this workshop or the that workshop, you got to be more like that 9-year-old kid who every one of you knows who plays Minecraft, who learned Minecraft on her own by going online, YouTube, connecting to other kids. They didn't learn it in a workshop. They'd be like, what? I'm not waiting until next Tuesday. I'm just going to go learn it. And that has to be the way we think about our own learning as professionals. That's going to be the learning that's expected when they're on the job. I love this. The most important thing that people can learn right now is how to learn. The skills, literacies, and dispositions to do that. And learning is the work right now. There's no question. Reality number 6, we're illiterate. Sorry. I'm right there with you. Now, I'm a former English teacher, high school English teacher of 22 years, or 18 years. And the National Council Teachers of English, about 4 years ago, put out these literacies that I think probably challenge many of us. In order to be literate, you must develop proficiency and fluency with the tools of technology. You have to be able to manage, analyze, synthesize multiple streams of simultaneous information. That's a literacy now, from NCTE. So if you want a traditional organization that's raising the bar, critique, analyze, evaluate multimedia, and create multimedia. If you want to get the bar raised even more, go check out the Mozilla Web Literacy Guide. Mozilla, from the people who brought you the first web browser. Remember Netscape? Those of you who are old enough to remember that. But how many of you know what a VPN is? Good. All right. If you don't know what a VPN is, don't open up your computer in public, basically. How many of you, rhetorically, are contributing? How many of you right now could I Google you by your full names and find something that you've contributed online, that you've shared online transparently, just rhetorically, right? But that's a part of being literate now. You can't just consume, you have to create. If you're not creating, you are illiterate, according to the standards that a lot of people are creating right now. And by the way, Mozilla Foundation is one of the most respected foundations, internet foundations out there. I mean, they do amazing work in the world around literacy especially. So, you know, this is what we get. We basically get kids who can't identify fake news. We get 82% of middle schoolers who can't tell sponsored content from regular content, according to Stanford. 82%. That's insane. And part of the reason is that we don't teach kids literacy in an ongoing, articulated way. We teach it to them in a 3-week unit in the second half of 8th grade. Or we take them to the library to do the information literacy unit. It can't be a unit anymore. Literacy is ongoing. You know, Google is a problem. Google, the algorithms that Google run, that Amazon runs, that Facebook run, are a huge, huge problem. They are hugely complex, hugely challenging to our privacy, to our well-being. Yet we don't talk very much about any of that with kids. We don't talk about that very much with teachers either. Twitter and echo chambers, you know, look, we obviously have a problem in this country right now in that we tend to retreat to whatever corner of the internet we agree with. And we never talk to people on the other side. And if we're only getting one view of the world and we can't talk to other people about it, this democracy is at risk. There's no question. And I think, to be honest with you, we as educators have to own some of the problems that we're seeing with literacy right now, in terms of people's inability to even discern truth online. Reality number 7, we're not real sure what the potentials of the technologies are. So I want to give you an example of someone who I think will kind of give you a sense of what's possible here. In most schools, basically, we use technology to teach. Most of the places that I go that have gotten Chromebooks or iPads, great. But when I try to suss out exactly how they're being used more as teaching devices. Everybody loves Google Classroom, but that's a teaching device. That's an organizational tool for teachers. It's not really a learning tool. And that's the difference. Are we using technology to learn and create? Not just kids, but the adults as well. So here's Nate. I want to play you a little bit of Nate's podcast. Nate's 8 years old. He's a podcaster. And I know he has some privilege. You can see that he has some equipment, and obviously his parents have helped him with this. But I do want to also make the point that nothing what I'm going to show you here that he's doing can't be done with just this device, and that, by the way, the latest research is showing that upwards of 90% of kids now have access to this device in some form. They may not carry them around their own, but they do have access now, and they are using these devices. So Nate has the Show About Science. You can go to iTunes, and you can download his podcast. I don't know if you can see this one, but basically when I did this screen cap, he had over 2,400 listens on this one little podcast. And this is what you get when you listen to Nate. This is pretty cool.
Hey guys, I'm very excited for another episode of Show About Science. This is your host, Nate, and today we're going to interview Coyote Peterson. I've been waiting for this for so long, and now it's finally happening! Yay, this is going to be an awesome episode about animals, so stay tuned. Here's the actual walk.
All right, kind of a boring little kid, not a lot of energy, I know. He's doesn't really want to learn much. I mean, think about that for a second. I mean, he's got a global audience, and the reason that he does that, I don't know if I have the slide in here, but the reason that he does it, yeah, there it is that he wants other people to love science. He wants other people to really catch the passion for it that he has. And I think that that's really cool. And if you listen to Nate's podcast, they're infectious. They're great. So Nate is like many of our kids. He's a creator. He's a sharer. He's a learner. He's not waiting to be taught. And the reality of it now is, welcome to your new reality. The world is filled with Nates at this point. And we have to understand what the implications of that are. So basically, we have 18-year-olds now who are making prosthetic arms from 3D printers for people who need them because he himself didn't have one. We have girls who want to write books about coding, who go to editors or publishers and can't get it published, so they go to Kickstarter. If you haven't been on Kickstarter, it's a place where you go if you need a little bit of funding. So Sasha went up here and asked for $5,000. Within a month, she had $17,000, and now you can go buy her book. Sasha tech savvy, loves to code. She's a published author at 14 years old on her own. Or my favorite one, this kid, 17-year-old in India, who was so just distraught over how many attacks were happening in his village that he created a sandal, a shoe, where if you're wearing it and you get attacked and you kick your attacker, it will electrocute him. And you can see he needs to work on the design a little bit. The battery is sticking out the side. But the point is this. The point is the way he talks about it. He says, basically, the invention process was an uphill climb. I ran into countless problems with the help of many great mentors from LinkedIn and social media. I taught myself programming. I'd spam them when the code didn't work. My prototype failed 17 times. I faced electrocution twice. My best friend got a nosebleed. This was not easy, but I kept going. And at the end, he felt like a superhero when he got the prototype to work. Now, all these kids are doing this outside of school, on their own, because they want to learn more about things they have passion for. And I keep thinking, how much better could they do that stuff with us? How much more could they do with us in terms of solving real-world problems, in terms of asking really interesting questions, in terms of becoming deep and powerful learners in their own rights? So learning is having its Elvis moment here. It really is. It's leaving the building. It's not something that we just do in physical space. And this is becoming now pretty clear. This was a survey a few months ago. 69% of 18 to 34-year-olds said they think they learn more from technology than from people. 69%. That's kind of crazy. Number 8, last one. The biggest divide is agency, not access. Now, the reason that I say that, I realize there is still a digital divide. There is an access divide. You know, the UN has made internet access a human right. And we are not still at the point where every child has access. And I think we need to get to that point sooner rather than later. I don't know how kids who have access and who know how to use it, who have the literacies and the dispositions around it, I don't know how kids without it are going to be able to flourish and thrive in the same ways that kids who have it and understand it. But at the end of the day, it's not so much about the access as it is about what you do with that access. And to me, this is the biggest challenge that we have. We give kids lots of devices in schools, we check lots of technology boxes, but we're not giving them more agency over what they learn. We're not giving them freedom to pursue the things they care about in ways that they have that freedom outside of school. And this is the divide, and it is growing and growing and growing. And it is not going to come back this way until we figure out how to give kids more agency over not just the how, but the what that they learn in schools. Because we must create learners now. If we are turning kids out in the world right now that are waiting to be told what to learn, when to learn it, how to learn it, good luck. Good luck to those kids. Because there are lots of people now who aren't waiting for anybody, or anything, or any course, any curriculum, anything else. By the way, this is the Pew survey that just came out earlier this year. Percentage of U.S. adults who use the internet by age in 2016 is now 99% of 18 to 29-year-olds. So this is not a choice any longer. This is not, well, you can do without it. You cannot do without it. You have to be skilled at it. You have to be literate at it. And you have to know how to use it in powerful ways. So basically, this is where agency resides. It's not about technology first. It's not about access first. Here's the deal. You don't need any technology to create conditions in classrooms like those that create powerful learning environments for kids. You don't need any technology. But if you have it, that's when it gets really cool. And this is the big shift that we as educators really need to understand. We now have total agency over our learning in ways that didn't exist even 10 years ago. And schools have not wrapped their brains around that at all. And we have to right now. because that's where we fall short of serving every kid in the best ways that we can, given the world as it is today. So, agency, yeah, it's difficult to spell school correctly too, obviously. Agency is difficult in a shul setting. I will change that before I send you the slide deck, I guarantee you. And this is from Jesse Stommel, one of my favorite bloggers, one of my favorite higher ed professors who I follow religiously. But, you know, agency, dialogue, self-actualization, and social justice are not possible in a system that pits teachers against students and encourages competition by ranking students against one another. This is not possible. And if we are to change it, this is where we have to start. And this is not about getting better. This is about being really different. Now, the good news really fast, because I know I'm running out of time. Leaders are leading. Pam Moran, my favorite superintendent in the world, from Albemarle, Virginia. I got about 5 minutes. Pam has a great Twitter feed. If you're not following it, I suggest you do. If you're not telling your students to follow it, I urge you to do that. She is, I think, a model of the type of learning and the type of culture that we have to have in schools right now. She has this idea of getting to yes. So the story about Pam is last fall, some middle school kids came up to her and they said, you know, Ms. Moran, the cafeteria seats are really uncomfortable. Is there any way you'd let us kind of design something different and make something different? And Pamela's like, yes, because she tries to get to yes as much as possible. A couple weeks later, she came back into school, turned the corner, was walking down the hallway of the cafeteria, heard power drills and hammers and saws and all sorts of stuff, turned the corner and saw that. And she was like, what? And it turns out what they were building was this, treehouse seating on wheels. Not what she was expecting. But the first thing she did was she went and got the safety officer and said, is this thing going to tip over on kids? And he said, no, it's fine. So she was like, cool. And now I think they've made 2 or 3 of these because she's all about tapping into the creativity that already exists. And you do that by giving kids agency and freedom. And basically, that redesigns every nook and cranny of the 20th century school. Northern Beaches Christian School outside of Sydney, our approach is on dual focus on learning and opportunity. We've been very intentional in fostering a culture of self-directed student-led learning. You wouldn't believe the stuff that these kids do. I mean, it is amazing the work that they're doing in the world. In Canada now, they are saying, look, we need more play. In Ontario, they've gone to all play, all day kindergarten. They're talking about going to all play, all day K through 6. Because what they're finding is kids are learning things that stick. And so you're moving from that little blue corner now to much more blue in terms of choice. British Columbia, Canada, this is the Peel School Board in Ontario. Fascinating conversations happening north of the border. That they're leading these conversations. They start with what we believe. This is what we believe about kids. This is what we believe about learners. I know you can't see this. This is New Zealand. Just, you know, look at the bottom half of the page. Where the headline is, shake up at school, national standards abolished in New Zealand. League tables axed, the exams goodbye. The country has said, no more. This is not conducive. The traditional system, the traditional way of thinking about things is not conducive. And I don't know if you heard about Kansas. Kansas has decided now, apparently, to do what it's calling its own moonshot on education. Where over the next 15 to 20 years, they want to transform everything about schools, overhaul the way education is delivered, and they're starting with maybe not having grade levels any longer. Kind of interesting. It's happening. So I'll leave you with these questions. I think they're good for you, and I think they're good for the people that you serve, the people that you teach. What do you believe? Have you written it down? Do you think about it on a regular basis? What do you as teachers believe about how the people in your classrooms learn most powerfully and deeply? Have you written it down? Do you have a manifesto? If not, write one. Because this is the foundational question of our work. There's no other more important question than articulating what we believe about learning. Number 2, how have you shared those beliefs? How have you articulated them? How have you let your students know? How are they letting their students know? How do you learn with technology? Are you leading a learning culture rather than a teaching culture? Are you literate in modern contexts? And to what level do you understand the new contexts for learning that are out there? And are you sending productive learners out into the world? I'll leave you with this quote with Seymour Papert. Thanks very much for being here this evening. I hope that was a good spend of your time. I hope you're challenged, and I hope your head is ringing, or whatever it was supposed to be, and I hope you're whirling, and I hope you're excited as well. But just remember that success in the slowly changing worlds of past centuries came from being able to do well what you were taught to do, but success in the fast-changing worlds of the future will depend on being able to do well what you were not taught to do. I really appreciate you having me tonight. Thanks very much. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Yay.